It looks like we have, excuse me, a decent few people, and I'm sure a few more will continue to join, but I think we'll get started. So my name is Nola. I am based at Tufts University, and I work on the ANH Academy Research Community Initiative with Alex and Will, who are also on the call. And I think shortly the more of the ANH team will be joining as well from all in one room. I'm so glad everyone has been able to join us today. I know there are a few familiar faces, so please excuse me if you've heard this before. But for those of you who are new to research communities, I'll do a brief introduction to them before I pass it over to today's presenters. Um, in the meantime, if you're able and your internet connection allows, please go ahead and turn on your video and introduce yourself in the chat. Um, for those of you who are new, the research roundtables are opportunities for community members to share their research and have conversations about successes, failures, learnings, and goals. Anyone can present, and we encourage you to use these sessions to share new findings or emerging research that's not yet complete. We only have a few requirements to present, and that it's that you have a clear goal and offer a short description of your topic, and then save half of that presentation time for open conversation with everyone else who's joined. Some past presenters have joined from uh, all over the world in countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Pakistan, Uganda, and Vietnam. And all of this work has been related to the accessibility, affordability, and demand for healthy diets. But we have a second research community focused on food supply, loss, and waste. So feel free to join both of those communities and attend as many meetings as you are able or wish to as well. If you'd like to present at an upcoming research community, you can contact any of us at researchcommunities@tufts.edu, and I'll put the email in the chat momentarily. Today's session will be a presentation from Joaquin, Gaston, and Kaleab, who are all on the call today. So thank you all for joining us. And I will pass it over to them, and then we will go to a roundtable discussion as soon as they're finished with that. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. I will start very straightforward. Good day, everyone. My name is Joaquin. I'm a Bolivian economist working at CIRAD in France. And today I'm honored to present at the NAH Academy Roundtable. I will present a study entitled Are Healthier Diets Culturally Affordable in Africa? Which is, I have to say, very much a collective effort. So the honor is shared with all the colleagues cited in this slide, including Gaston and Kaleab, of course. And a big thank you to the organizers for the invitation. In this study, our goal was to provide context, to provide both empirical and methodological insights as support for discussion of future dietary guidelines across 4 selected African countries: Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, and Uganda. Our approach was to model those diets using mathematical programming to obtain nutritionally adequate, economically affordable, and culturally acceptable diets for women and their children in 2 cities for each of the selected countries. Now, I know that there are some experts in the room, but I always appreciate when speakers think of the occasional tourist. So first of all, what is diet optimization and what is mathematical programming? Mathematical programming is a technique used to minimize or maximize an objective function subject to a set of constraints. This means that what we do is to describe a problem the best we can with mathematical equations, and then we ask a software to solve the problem by minimizing or maximizing a certain criterion. For example, in food science, this could be used to find a new product with the cheapest or most nutrient-dense mix of ingredients. In nutrition and health, it is used to find a diet that minimizes toxic exposure or minimize the budget or minimize changes from an observed diet. Let's briefly look at what we can find in literature. The first precedent of diet optimization is the paper The Cost of Subsistence by Joseph Stiegler in 1945, where he described his efforts to compute the cheapest diet meeting recommended nutrient allowances. Of course, he did not have access to the algorithms or software we use today, but he was already applying the same underlying logic, optimizing diets to maximize affordability. What I'd like to highlight here is that even then, Stiegler clearly acknowledged key limitations, and his study considered a limited list of food, as you can see in the results shown in this slide. But more importantly for this presentation, he acknowledged that his solution was not necessarily aligned with professional dietitians' views on palatability or the relevance of dietary variety and other broader considerations. If we fast forward to 2006, our colleague Nicole Darmon published a paper investigating nutritionally adequate diets for French women, looking for diets that were as close as possible to observed food consumption patterns. She found that while most French women could access these diets within their budgets, the low-income groups had to concede substantially larger deviations from their current eating habits. Here, we are certainly touching on cultural acceptability of the model diets. Naturally, many other studies could be cited here, and I've selected these ones to raise a point. For those interested in a broader overview of scientific efforts to address affordability through least cost approaches, there is a recent narrative review that provides a useful synthesis. But more recently, several research teams have modeled least cost diets at large scale in Africa and even globally, providing valuable insights into dietary affordability. By quoting just a few lines, we can sense how powerful these approaches have become because, for example, masters and colleagues note that these methods can show where and when nutritious diets are increasingly affordable or unaffordable. And Hirvonen and colleagues conclude that improving diets is affordable in many countries, but for many people, it will require some combination of higher income, nutritional assistance, and lower prices. It is not my intention today to present these papers in detail, but it is fair to say that they have generated large-scale evidence using approaches that allow us to explore and even monitor how affordability challenges evolve over time. So, how is the study I present today different? First, we aim to contribute by opening a discussion on how cultural acceptability can be articulated within these optimization efforts, particularly if we want to discuss the suitability of adoption of modeled diets. Second, we deliberately focus on a narrower scale, namely urban contexts and vulnerable population groups, targeting women and their less than 2 years old children. And third, we design our approach to allow comparison across our 4 selected countries. So ultimately, we address a slightly different question. Can we design nutrient adequate diets that are feasible, affordable, and culturally acceptable in our case studies? Now, more specifically, how did we model these diets? We worked with case studies in 4 countries, 2 cities per country, and 2 target populations in each. First, we conducted a dietary survey in each city using 24-hour recalls, recording what participants had eaten in the previous day. These data provided food consumption patterns, which allowed us to construct baseline diets with a standardized energy target, enabling comparison across case studies. This data collection requires substantial effort, but it also comes with limitations. We use purposive sampling to identify mother and child diets, and surveys were conducted during the COVID crisis period. Therefore, we do not claim statistical representativity or external validity of the baseline diets. In addition, standard practice usually requires repeated 24-hour recalls. With a single recall, our baseline diets, this methodology may appear slightly more balanced than true eating habits in these countries. But that being said, these baseline diets still provide a snapshot of prevailing food consumption patterns in our study settings. Second, the entire modeling process was organized around food groups, which simplified analysis and, most of all, facilitated cross-country comparison. Third, we used national food composition tables to compute the nutrient content of each model diet. And fourth, we defined nutrient intake requirements based on well-established international recommendations. The model therefore searched for diets that meet these requirements, and finally, we obtained food price data from the World Bank ICP database, allowing us to calculate diet costs, and which in turn played a central role in the budget constraint of the model. Now, this slide summarizes the structure of our model. The figure on the top left illustrates how the model combines the data that I just described and equations to identify an optimal solution. On the top right, we recall the 4 dimensions of sustainable diets. And as you may have already guessed in this study, our model includes 3 of these 4 dimensions. Environmental sustainability was beyond the scope of this work. But nutritional adequacy and economic affordability are included as constraints, and cultural acceptability is embedded in the objective function. Meaning that the model searches for a diet that satisfies the constraints while minimizing the deviation from the baseline diet. If we look briefly at how this objective function works, first, the model calculates the difference between the modeled diet and the baseline diet. Then this difference is expressed relative to the baseline diet. So the model works with proportional rather than absolute changes. Finally, these differences are squared so that the model prioritizes solutions with several small changes rather than a few large ones. Before moving to the results, please keep in mind our study design. We have 4 countries, 2 cities per country, and 2 participant types per city. This means that the model was implemented 16 times, once for each case study. Now, given the number of model runs, the slide may look a bit busy, but the main message is straightforward, is that we obtain a feasible solution in all 16 case studies. So let me now zoom in one example, women in Hawassa, Ethiopia, to illustrate how these results can be read. On the right, the spider chart compares the baseline diet in blue with the model diet in red. We see that the baseline diet falls short of several nutrient requirements, while the model diet meets them as expected, since nutritional adequacy is enforced as a constraint in the model. On the left, uh, figure, the baseline diet intakes appear in light green, and the model diets in dark in dark green, allowing us to visualize which food groups require adjustments. So the model finds feasible solutions for all case studies, but what about affordability? This figure focuses on affordability across the women's diets. In dark gray bars represent the budget of the baseline diets. The blue diamonds show the budgets of the model diets, which are by construction equal to or lower than the baseline budgets. But does that mean that these diets are affordable? To provide context, the figure also displays the poverty line as well as household incomes, both the national average and the bottom 40% of the income distribution. In addition, we run an alternative version of the model that explicitly minimizes the cost, and these results are shown by the light gray bars. So in each case, whether a model diet is considered affordable or not, it depends on where we draw the affordability threshold, where we draw the line. However, one message is clear, is that the baseline food budgets uh, in our case studies were not in themselves incompatible with meeting nutrient requirements, but it is fair to say that the relative affordability of the model diets remain limited for certain population groups. And so how this relative affordability relates to cultural acceptability? This heat map shows the food consumption shifts required to reach nutrient adequacy. Darker tones indicate larger changes. And as you can see, these are no minor adjustments. This suggests that some of the model diets may be culturally difficult to adopt. If we read the figure vertically, we identify shift patterns that are common across case studies. This is the case of increasing intake of legumes, fruits, and veggies, and reducing reliance on cereals, and to a lesser extent, roots and tubers. If we read it horizontally, we see which case studies would face the largest behavioral changes. Recalling the previous slide, countries with higher food budgets and household incomes, such as Kenya and South Africa, require lighter, though still significant, shifts to meet nutrient requirements. And in contrast, countries with lower budgets and household incomes will need substantially larger shifts to achieve the same targets. This is why we chose the expression culturally affordable in our title. Our results suggest that economic constraints are central to the challenge of healthier diets, but they are not the only barrier. The greater the affordability constraint, the larger the dietary shifts required, and harder it becomes to view these modeled diets as suitable for adoption. It is time to wrap up we argue that integrating cultural acceptability into diet optimization produces results that are more likely to be adopted. Although at this stage, this remains an assumption rather than a demonstrated outcome. Nevertheless, this approach provides concrete elements to inform and contextualize discussions on food-based dietary guidelines. It also helps identify which food groups should be prioritized. But of course, the approach has limitations. We assume that the observed diets are a proxy for actual preferences. The modeled dietary shifts do not account for supply constraints or price responses. And nutrient requirements are limited to those nutrients consistently available across national food composition tables, meaning that some important nutrients may be overlooked by the model. Finally, with more time and resources, we would have aimed to incorporate environmental impact in the model and to organize stakeholder workshops to explore how these findings could translate into real-world solutions. In our case studies, we find that healthier diets are not inherently incompatible with the observed budgets of our case studies, but we do see that relative affordability and alignment with cultural preferences remain limited. The main practical recommendation is, of course, to increase the fruit and veggies consumption, and the takeaway message is that we want to spark discussion on how the suitability of model diets should explicitly account for trade-offs between affordability and cultural acceptability. Thank you for your attention. Looking forward for the comments and questions.
Thank you very much for that. That was a great summary of the study, and I think a lot of interesting results there. Um, if anyone would like to start off asking questions, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, you can feel free to type in the chat box and we can ask your question for you if you're unable to unmute.
There's a whole group of people in the A&H Academy, and your camera settings actually allow us to see Jeff Waggy very pensively. But it's really nice to have all of them be joining. I don't know if they have thoughts, questions. And of course, a very big group from Makere and Uganda I see on the call. Be interesting to hear from them. Kaleab, also regarding the Ethiopia sites.
Mary Beth, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Mary Beth Obama. I'm a MSc candidate at the University of Edinburgh, and I also work as a research manager at Tailored Food. So I find this a very interesting research. I think personally because I did co-author a paper on food-based dietary guidelines as well. So I wanted to know in terms of referencing the nutrition amount of each food group, was there a particular reference that was used? Like in terms of measuring how they come in par with like the nutritional profile. So was there a particular reference that was used in order to say that okay, for this particular food group to meet the measure of affordability as well as the nutrition content required, this is the particular gram or measurement that was used. So I think that's the first question I have in terms of measuring between the nutrition content and the affordability, what standard was used to measure the two? And I think the second question I have was there a relationship between countries, or I don't think I noticed that for each of the countries that was chosen between Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, they all have food-based dietary guidelines existing. But I wanted to know, was there a relationship between the quality of the food-based dietary guideline and the level of affordability or the level of cultural relevance it was in promoting the affordability of that diet? So I don't know if I was able to express questions clearly.
Um, I'm sorry, I didn't fully uh, follow the questions. If you may please repeat them because I was struggling to grasp the question. The first one is about how did we measure the nutritional content of diets? Is that so?
Yeah, like our food, in that to know that okay, this is affordable. Was there a kind of measurement of this amount of grams
Mm-hmm.
is in terms of its nutritional profile in relationship to it, and then it's being affordable? Like, I think that was, for example, if someone was to eat um 10 grams of rice or maybe grains pulse,
Mm-hmm.
would that be considered as affordable if that's what that person is able to buy, despite
Mm-hmm.
it not being sufficient for like the cost of a healthy diet? Like it's not enough of that gram. So was there like a kind of checking that okay, this is sufficient this is
Mm-hmm.
sufficient amount of calories this food should give and the person is able to buy, and hence it is affordable to that person, if there was a kind of measurement of relationship taken in that aspect. So that's more of the question I had for my first question. Then the second question was in regards to the part of your paper where you're referring to cultural relevance. And I was wondering that was there a relationship between the quality of the food-based dietary guidelines, like maybe how detailed, how refer, like what was referred to it in for countries that had maybe probably more detailed food-based dietary guidelines like South Africa, was there a relationship between those policies and acceptance of all that in regards to the cultural relevance, or those were not considered in the paper? I was just wondering the insights in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Um, so I will first give my take on the best I can, and maybe Caleb or Gaston want to add something. For the first question, so how it accounts for measuring nutritional content. So first of all, there are two ways of doing this kind of models. The first one is individual-based models. So for each individual, you will run the model once, and then when you obtain results, you would then make average or statistical reports of all the runs that you made of the model. And there is another way of doing it, which you already process statistically the intakes and the diets, and then you run what is called a population model. So this is what we do. So we do not have like a feedback for each individual or participant in the survey. So what we do have is that in the survey we would ask how, as you said, for example, the rice, how many grams they consumed in the past day, and then we have we linked these intakes that were recorded in the survey with the food composition table, which give us specifically for each nutrient how many nutrients in micrograms or whatever for these 10 grams of rice. This is how the model accounts for nutrient content of the diets, and whether it's affordable or not, it's already at the scale later when we are evaluating what are the shifts that will be required for the aggregate population, targeted population in this case, to meet nutritional requirements. So it's a fairly complicated to say if it's like to give feedback for each participant on whether one decision is affordable or not. But we are trying to provide insights and context for discussion at another level. Which brings me to the second question. looking at food-based dietary guidelines. What about the context and whether it's acceptable or not? We do remain with our role is to provide context. This is our take on this, and we didn't have the chance to, and it's not our role to decide or to go to the decision-making phase. But we would certainly be interested in discussing this with the stakeholders. But at this stage, we are only providing context, and we do not have more to say about this.
Maybe just to quickly add on what Joaquin said. So we used 24-hour recalls with portion size estimates and the like. So those were aggregated at food group level. So the median portion sizes were aggregated at food group level, and then what was the affordability question was addressed vis-a-vis a food basket and not necessarily a specific food or an individual food group. So it's the basket that we are comparing against maybe poverty line or incomes, and then say whether or not this food basket um, meets the affordability criteria or not, and then what are the shifts required to meet the various constraints, being meeting nutritional requirements, but at the same time culturally acceptable and affordable economically. For food-based dietary guidelines, 3 out of the 4 countries have already food-based dietary guidelines. And as you may know, in most cases, food-based dietary guidelines tend to be prescriptive or look at only one dimension of the issue, which is how can we meet nutritional requirement. In most cases, that's the primary question they tend to answer. And often we see it in the Ethiopian case as well. If you look at what is the proportion of the population that can afford to meet the food-based dietary guideline recommendations, then you would find a very low proportion, because the design of the food-based dietary guideline was so that it informs what needs to be done to meet nutrient requirements, and the emphasis was less so on what would be affordable and the how part. The what is always answered in most cases. The how is the less entertained question in developing the food-based dietary guidelines, and I think that's one contribution that this study provides to a certain extent.
Thank you. Thank you, Kaleab and Joaquin. I can add a few liners here. As Joaquin has rightly said, this study, the results can be understood in the context in which we collected this data. For example, here in Uganda, by the time of this study, we didn't have any dietary guidelines, but we had some information here and there we were using, especially from Harvest Plus, and also in coming out with the information we used, we borrowed from neighboring countries that have these guidelines, especially Tanzania and others. And just as he said, this was to open up a discussion. And indeed, data from this study has been used by Ministry of Education, which so the results of this study have to be looked at in that context. Thank you very much.
Gaston, we lost you for a second there, but it sounded like you said that the results of this study were being used by the Minister of Education. Is that right?
Yes, and I was trying to say that this study has to be looked in that context of setting the ball rolling and to provide information from which actors can start from.
That's great.
Thank you, Gaston.
Thank you all. Okat, if you would like to ask your question, please go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Um, Thank you very much, team, for making that wonderful and tremendous work, and also sharing in the outputs and the results. Also, greetings to my professor, Dr. Gaston, for being part of the team and also for making Uganda to be part of the study. I would like to draw back from that aspect of the methodology and basically looking at the two participant types, the mothers and also the children. And when you look at the survey, which was the 24-hour recall, and there was an energy target of about 2,100 kilocalories for women and also about 990 kilocalories for children. My first question is that in terms of women and children, did it have a specific age group for that energy requirement? Because that would also help in terms of borrowing up from such kind of a methodology. Secondly, looking at the model itself, in case I may not have gotten something right, please you'll be able to throw more light. There was that aspect of inputs, and it had quite a number of items, I think about 4, in terms of the baseline diet, the food composition table, the nutritional recommendations, as well as the food prices. This brings me to the thinking in terms of seasonality. For example, you find in one season, for example, in Uganda, you have increased supply of fruits and vegetables, or even some of the locally available cultural foods. For example, in the central, you might find grasshoppers are all over in certain seasons. So you collected the data around 2019, if I may recall. Could you throw more light which month and how probably you could have accounted for aspects of seasonality in as far as your model is concerned? And lastly, reflecting on your study findings, and I'm more interested in terms of the feasibility, the findings around feasibility, looking at the different food groups and you're comparing the baseline diet as well as the optimized diet. And if I could reflect on this, I think there was something that was showing that, for example, in the optimized diet could result into increase in the fruits and vegetables. And this gives me a thinking of in terms of fruits and vegetables. When you look at the graphs, I did not really capture it very well, more so for the Ugandan context. And there would be some sort of increase in the optimized diet, increase in fruits and vegetables in the optimized diet compared to the baseline diet. The question is in terms of the feasibility of achieving that. Because you also reported the affordability, have you tried to really to correlate the feasibility vis-a-vis affordability of your findings? And lastly, um, the other aspect of acceptability, the cultural acceptability, I think from the heat map and you had, I think, a scale. Could you share some sort of what informed that scale? Because I think it was rating in terms of delta percentages, something like that. Could you kindly throw more light what informed that scale in terms of acceptability? Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Okat, for your questions. Yes, first question about the methodology, two participant types. Why do we have energy standardized diets? The objective was to compare our results among countries. So if we had an average diet in Uganda that had, let's say, 1,800 kilocalories, and then in South Africa, an average diet that has 2,500 kilocalories, then it was hard to compare the intakes of the among countries. So what we tried to do was to devise this baseline diet as if it were for food-based dietary guidelines, meaning that it had to reach these nutrient requirements, and these nutrient requirements, among them is the energy ones. So we took these energy targets to homogenize the diets among the 4 countries. I don't know if this is clear enough, but anyhow, this is based on, I mean, why we chose those thresholds of energy is based on nutrient recommendations that we found on literature, and our panel of nutritionists were pretty confident about this. And then the second question about seasonality and supply. I agree with you. This is something that is very interesting, but it was not the objective of this study to monitor or to follow through seasons what was happening, but to give a snapshot and compare among 4 countries. So I would be very interested to repeat this kind of study with more data, and certainly account for what's going on from the supply side and the seasonality. That would be very much. I think this will be very interested, but for this study it's out of the scope. Yeah. So third, feasibility optimized diets and shifts on foods for shifts, yeah, increasing fruits and vegetables. Here, I have to say, in my modeling mind, feasible, I understand that the model, as I described it in equations, runs and finds a feasible solution. That's my understanding of feasible in this context. But sometimes we think about feasible as in, would it be possible to do this in real life? And these are 2 different things. So I think these models are still simplifications of reality, and there is still work to do to say if these healthier diets, model diets, would be feasible. But as you already said, for example, seasonality and supplies are not accounted. But I can answer the 4th question, which is heat map and acceptability. So if we see in this heat map, and and it's very clear that the scale on the right it's about percentages, and as I said during the presentation, these are no minor changes whatsoever to reach those nutrient requirements. The intakes would have to change substantially. So maybe I went too fast on this figure, but to me it's very very important to acknowledge that in the context in the context of our case studies, this to meet these nutrient requirements will significate would mean significant changes from current eating habits. I don't know if that was clear enough to answer your question.
Thank you for your responses to that. We have one question in the chat, so we'll go to that, and then we will go over to whoever is asking the question in the A&H Academy room there, and to Will. But first from the chat, Aurelien had asked in which season you conducted the 24-hour diet recall. Was it during the lean or harvest season? And were there any differences in terms of diet affordability and acceptability based on urban-rural settings?
Yeah. Maybe quickly, so one of the study was focused on urban areas, and the choice of the cities, what primary cities and secondary cities, like in Ethiopia would be Addis Ababa and Hawassa as a secondary city. In most cases, we have the capital and then a secondary city chosen to have a gradient of what urbanization can bring. That was the intention behind this choice. And so we wouldn't be able to say anything about the rural areas. And as well as seasonality, this is a cross-sectional 24-hour recall. So it gives us a snapshot. Perhaps I'm not sure, but the price, if it was taken over a year, it might account to a certain extent. But also these are urban areas, so seasonality is still important, but not as important as if it was if the study was conducted in rural areas. So that's one thing to further note.
Thank you. In whoever is maybe asking the question in the A&H room there, if you'd like to unmute and go ahead and ask that.
Hi, thank you very much for the presenters. Maybe I missed this because I walked in a few minutes late. I was just wondering how you defined cultural, sorry, did you say culturally acceptable, right? So how did you define that, and how do you then, considering food cultures are also changing very rapidly, what is culture and what is might be an individual preference, and how do you differentiate, even if it's not in the data conceptually, how did you differentiate that? Because then your recommendations go along around what what a healthy diet constitutes of, that they should have more of legumes and so on. But it's not entirely then clear how we have taken cultural acceptability into those as well.
Yes, thank you for the very important question, actually. We do have some colleagues that have been working on this in the past, and I wouldn't like to define it myself, cultural acceptability, but I do want to recall that those limitations that that Stigler acknowledged on his study, talking about palatability and cultural preferences. So I'm not sure we did define cultural acceptability in the paper, but our intention is to discuss whether these model diets and recommendations are acceptable, whatever the cultural barrier, whether it's preferences or other types of barrier are playing. So this is what we wanted to represent by cultural acceptability, which is a broader definition of all these considerations as for whether the diet that is modeled is suitable for adoption in a cultural sense. And yeah, so one of the limitations is actually we are assuming that these observed diets are a proxy for the preferences as well. So this is also something that has to be taken carefully in this study, but we do acknowledge it. And what we want is to raise attention that these model diets and these recommendations actually can be seen as difficult to adopt, and we may need a way to express how difficult this could be culturally. Thank you.
Thank you. Will, we have a couple minutes if you wanted to. I know you
Yeah.
have to jump off, but
Yeah, so first of all, great work. Thank you very much. Appreciate the multi-site quality of it. Having 2 cities in each country, the close attention to the dietary survey. It's really great. And I'm sorry I have to go. We often continue past the hour because these are really interesting discussions. But just 2 key points here. One is from reading the paper. The paper you acknowledge that B12 and folate are vitamins that are omitted. And as far as I could tell, calcium is also omitted. And that means that you can, in this chart that we're looking at now, this heat map, you don't need to increase milk. You don't need to increase other animal source foods like fish. That could be in part because of the omission of the B12, the calcium, and the folate, perhaps. Also, regarding how much increase in vegetables and fruits is needed, as far as I could tell, you're calling for the whole food group to be shifted with the same proportions of each item being consumed. And so people might be consuming relatively low cost vegetables, onions, cabbages, and if they shift within the vegetables, that could, with much less increase in total weight, meet the nutrient needs. So, when thinking about these cultural acceptability issues, the huge challenge everywhere in the world is on culture, regarding vegetables and then fruits, and then regarding affordability, it's animal source foods. And in many other models, you really need to increase legumes. I'm not quite sure what the legume story is in this model. People seem to be having approximately enough relative to your benchmark. But it would be very interesting as we keep working in this area to just understand that choice within the vegetable sector.
Yes.
What's really going on there among vegetables and helping people to have culinary practices that are culturally acceptable and affordable, without too much effort, because a lot of this involves, of course, women's effort within the home. It's extremely difficult sometimes to plan for the day and so forth. But it's really interesting to see this study, and you're right to just stop on this heat map. It's really an important result and very interesting to discuss. So thanks very much. Really appreciate it. And I'm sorry I have to run.
Thank you, Will. It was very agree with the points you raised, very on point. Yes.
Thank you.
and we have a couple last minutes, Lizzie, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My question is on the data on the screen now. I could find out that it's based on 3 countries in East Africa: Uganda, Addis Ababa, and Ethiopia. No, Uganda, Addis Ababa, and South Africa. So from the North and Southern Africa. So Was there any effort to collect data from West Africa or other countries in Africa on this? And how can we better include these regions in our advocacy and interventions? Thank you.
Kaleab, do you have any thoughts on this?
Quickly, maybe this was part of a Horizon EU project where the countries were defined, and therefore, we were limited by the countries that were part of the consortium. But it is definitely interesting to look at, make a similar effort in West African countries as well.
Maybe I can add something. Thank you, Professor Kaleab, for making that contribution on this matter. Even within the countries where these studies took place, you find that there are also limitations of approach. These countries of ours are varied with different cultural practices in different regions, but we could only do as much, only 2 cities. Like here in Uganda, you find every region almost it's a different culture, the way people handle their foods. But the idea, as we said at the beginning, we have to start somewhere, and then we keep collecting information and increasing the data bank on these kind of things. Indeed, after this food study, FAO here in Uganda has supported different similar studies in different regions, and this one is also helping. So we also assume at continental level, we are going to get more studies for Central, North Africa, West Africa, and then we enrich the conversation. It's difficult doing this kind of studies at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we've finished the hour. Thank you so much, Joaquin, Kaleab, and Gaston, for presenting your study and sharing all of this with us and answering all of these questions. Thank you, everyone else, for participating. I'm going to put the link to the site page again in the chat, and I'll post the recording of this there. It also has a link to their study on that page, so you can find it and read the whole thing in depth if you haven't had a chance to yet and would like to see more of these results. And it has the links to the 2 research communities as well there. If you have any other questions, you can always reach out to me at researchcommunities@tufts.edu. And I just want to put a reminder out as well that the Science Policy Fellowship application is still open for about another month. And I know that Kaleab, you've been involved in those in the past as a mentor. So if you have any questions about those, the email is there in the chat as well. Thank you again, everyone, and please get in touch with any other questions.
Thank you, Nola. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.